I quit being a noble and became a commoner. Authors, Kisaki Yamato. Chapter 1-20. Don't want to dance, you're good at dancing. The noble person in front of me, who had said that one sentence to me, was Fernand Empire's third imperial prince, His Highness Ludens. I am honored by your compliment. I expressed my gratitude like a lady. Ha, do I have to dance with this guy next? Even though I just don't want to dance. I probably won't see you ever again, and I didn't even want to meet you. Well, I should be pleased that this could be used as joke material afterwards. I look at the floor as much as possible and only glance up. He has light blonde hair, emerald green eyes and dazzling prince smile. He wore a purple emblem permitted only by the royal family. He looks exactly like he does in the Aristocrat Almanac. Though, he was much cooler in person than in portrait. I was fine with dancing with the Prime Minister's son, Roberto, but why am I dancing with such high-ranking people? They also hide their position. It was bad of them to mix in with others. Maybe there were other things too. My instincts tells me that I shouldn't get involved any further. I must show minimum discourtesy while dealing with them while ignoring everything else. In 3 days, I won't be a noble anymore. The knowledge I have as a noble might be useful in the future, but noble acquaintances aren't. A little about the past. 01 I am Aisha Maria Org 2000. I will be a 16-year-old young lady in 3 days. Why am I, who decided to stop being a noble at 16, participating in such a ball? Let's rewind back a little. I, a noble who is bad at her words, is probably scowled at by nobles. I am an illegitimate child born from my father, Earl Thousand, and my mother, a mere commoner who was a seamstress. My father was of course a noble and had a wife named Furore-sama. He also had 3 children. My older brother, Gerlin, was older than me by 10 years. My oldest sister, Catherine, was older than me by 3, and my second sister, Rosalie, 1 year. So why was I born? Because Furore-sama left her Earl Thousand side to return to her family home with her 3 children so that my older brother, Gerlin, can improve his fencing before entering higher education. Earl Thousand might be an outstanding person in the noble circles, but he was someone who needed to be supported by a woman, so he used my mother as a substitute for Furore-sama. My mother said that he didn't contact her at all. How did things become like this? She would often say to herself and laugh. My mother, who was an excellent seamstress, was often asked to make clothes for nobles for a little extra on the side. She would adjust clothes for them or add embroidery. My mother, who was skilled and not that bad looking, caught the eye of my father, who eventually cheated on his wife. Just one mistake continued for life. That was me. My kind-hearted father never robbed me of my life, and I was born. I wasn't abandoned on the streets, even though only half of my blood was noble, because it was all for the sake of the Thousand House honor. Furore-sama, who had high pride, couldn't forgive my mother nor me. The gardener's work cabin, located outside of the estate grounds, became our living place. The gardener couple would occasionally help us out, but we basically lived with the 2 of us, my mother and me. My father would come to see how we were doing once a month, but he was no match for Furore-sama and would quickly return home. We didn't use any living expenses, but our lifestyle was somewhat inferior to the lives of the common people. We had to draw water from the well ourselves and lower our heads to get food from the estate's kitchen. We also had to lower our heads to get clothes, and what we finally got were hand-me-downs. We wouldn't be able to live if we had pride. You would think that my mother could work as a seamstress, but she couldn't carry the young me around while she worked. My mother was strong and cheerful. She snuck away from the estate as soon as I was able to walk and work secretly at a clothing shop, where she had acquaintances at. We couldn't live luxuriously, but our lives became easier with cash on hand. Don't hurt the Thousand House honor. That was the only thing we were careful about. We couldn't disregard this fact while in town. The clothes I wore were simple and out of fashion, but it had embroidery to show off luxury. That was effect for my mother and father and atonement to Furore-sama. It was mostly just me and my mother. This was natural for me and I didn't feel unhappy. I was suddenly called to the estate when I turned 3. Even though I was only a half-blood, I was obliged to obtain noble education. I, who have never been anywhere except for the kitchen, met Furuosama and my siblings for the first time in a place called the parlor, where there was a big fluffy carpet and carved furniture. 03. A little about the past. 02. I heard from my mother that my father had a wife and other children besides me. But after all, how could a 3-year-old child understand this? I, who couldn't grasp the situation well, was taken to the estate alone. I stood firmly in the parlor. Before my eyes was a beautiful woman with lightly wavy red hair. She stared at me coldly. This was when I knew that the woman in front of me was Furuosama. The boy, with reddish brown hair, standing behind Furuosama, as if she was protecting him, was also staring at me coldly. It was my older brother Gerlin. There were also 2 girls hiding in Furuosama's dress with the same reddish brown hair. The one with almond-shaped eyes was older sister Catherine and the one with droopy eyes was older sister Rosalie. My father had light brown hair and my mother light blonde, so I had straight caramel hair. I never had the opportunity to play with children my age, I could only watch them from afar, so I must have looked at my siblings with great interest. Still, I had never seen anyone with red hair up close and my unsightly gaze quickly caused Furuosama displeasure. Know your place. I thought that the beautiful red-haired woman was coming towards me and my body jumped. My cheeks were pressed with the folding fan. My surprise won over my pain and I didn't know right from left. The folded fan dropped to the floor when I looked down. The beautiful red-haired woman left the parlor when I lifted my gaze from the floor. My father picked me up off the floor. The person who left just now was my wife Furor. I didn't blame the woman nor did I treat my cheeks. My standing in the estate was decided at this point. My position was the bottommost. A room at the end of the first floor became my bedroom. It was a guest room that wasn't so big. The noble education, in other words, education given to me by a tutor, was conducted in the study room. Other than that, I remained confined in my room. If I had time, I would return to the gardener's work cabin where my mother was, but I could only remain in my room when I couldn't return. My mother could only enter the kitchen, so she didn't know anything about what was happening. The people who worked at the estate also looked down on me and didn't help me. Well, my mother said it was normal to do things for oneself, so for a while, I didn't realize that this wasn't how a noble lady should be treated. They probably didn't want to get involved. No one wanted Furuosama to scowl at them. I stayed at the estate in 3-week intervals under the guidance of the private tutor. During my stay, I would learn table manners and dancing on top of my education. I would suddenly be called back to the estate and quickly return to my small room. I would study for 3 days a week for half the day in the mornings when I didn't stay in the estate. My life continued like this. Did your brothers and sisters take the same education as you? Sometimes I would learn with them and sometimes I wouldn't. Still, they were older than me, so they could do everything. My siblings wouldn't teach me even if I was struggling and I barely made the tutor angry. When they were younger, they would gang up and bully me. When they got older, they would ignore me or treat me like a servant. I had no choice but to obey my tutor's instructions. Only the tutor would come into the estate to talk to me. She would answer my questions. My mother would often tell me to thank my father, who gave me the opportunity to learn noble education. Yes, yeah. That's right, commoners didn't have this opportunity. My mother taught me how to live as a commoner. That's why I became who I am today. 04. A little about the past. 03. Asia Maria. A shriveled voice said as they struck the back of my hands with a thin stick. My tutor, Miss Dulcie, looked at me with a scary face. The young me couldn't drink tea without making a sound. Meals were taken in the study room under Miss Dulcie's supervision until my table manners were perfected. Miss Dulcie. As a tutor of the Thousand House, she was an honest person who did her job properly. She did her job properly, so she was strict even towards children, but I felt like she was especially strict towards me. Her dark brown hair was tied up in a single ponytail. She wore high quality but plain long skirt. She felt older than my mother and a little older than Furor-sama. She would overlook if someone made a mistake in front of her 3 times, any more than that, and you would get hit with a stick somewhere on your body. I couldn't do something right after being hit, can I? It's impossible to oppose her. I heard from a maid that there was a rumor about a young lady from a wealthy baron family had ruined Miss Dulcie. Well, it has nothing to do with me though. I studied noble education in the study room of the place I called the estate. It wasn't filled with more things than needed, but it was a big room. The place where I learned had 4 simple desks pushed together. I practiced tea time mannerism on a sofa with carved legs and a table. I learned things like how to make delicious tea. In a vacant space, I learned to dance on the wood floor. It was a place to study, but I had my meals in here whenever I was at the estate until I was around 8 years old. My brother and sisters didn't come to this room when I turned 5. When I thought about it now, I could have my meals relaxingly if Miss Dulcie wasn't there to rebuke me. After the maid brought the meal to the study room on a cart, I would serve myself, arrange the cutlery and deepen my knowledge about food and taste. I felt that the food was delicious. It didn't have anything to do with making nice conversations or sitting with people. If the teacher concluded that I had perfect table manner, then I would have to eat meals with my family, in the dining hall, and the food would be less delicious. It didn't matter to me even if a first-class chef cooked the food with high quality and carefully prepared ingredients. The most delicious meal was one cooked by my mother. No matter what, this wouldn't change. I learned letters at first in my classroom lectures and then I would transcribe words. It became a little less scary to live in the estate by myself after I was able to read. I borrowed picture books from the estate's extravagant library. It was very scary to suddenly have to sleep by yourself at the age of 3, so I pulled the covers over my head and sang. It didn't matter that the bed was clean and fluffy. I always slept with my mother at that time and I longed for her so much that I wanted to cry. I thought that they would get angry at me if I cried, so I didn't. I honestly think that the trauma from this time caused me to become unable to show my emotions. I had less time to learn than my siblings, and I was only able to memorize one of the Noble Almanac. The Noble Almanac was like a dictionary, containing all the facts about the nobles of this kingdom. There was about 1,000 pages. It didn't just contain their name, but also their hair and eye color, special features and achievements. Portraits were drawn for the royal family. There was a full 15 pages about the royal family tree. Relatives of major houses were also listed. Incidentally, I was also listed in the almanac. It listed my name, my hair and eye color. It was only 1 line. I was angry that my mother's name wasn't listed. A new almanac was published every year and whenever I had free time, Miss Dulcie would ask me many questions related to the almanac. I read it so much that it could also be said to be my favorite book. Of course, if I couldn't answer it then I would get the stick. I wondered why Miss Dulcie made me read all of this. Another thing I studied a lot was dance. It was completely different from the dancing commoners did. First, it was bad if the dance posture wasn't correct. I wonder how many hours I stood with a book on top of my head? My sisters were mean and I dropped my book, which caused Miss Dulcie to hit me with a stick. I wore my sisters' hand-me-down dresses and high heels and practiced the steps while smiling. I didn't think that I would be invited to any balls, but I couldn't go against Miss Dulcie. As soon as a new dance step became popular, she would make me practice it until I mastered it. Well, I didn't hate dancing, so I remembered the steps. I also mastered how to fake smile. I thought that the way I carried myself was too light. I was the one who mostly brewed tea at the study room. This also went well. I did so well that I could probably work as a young lady maid. I hardly drank such luxury items like tea when I lived with my mother. But sometimes I would receive low-quality tea, which I take home and brew. What was noble education useful for? They learn the responsibility of a noble, manage their territories and become a model for the people, serve your kingdom. I can't believe I was involved in such a thing. Marriage? I don't think I would want that. I didn't have any noble pride in me at all. I was only a noble half-blood, So my family, who are noble, looked down on me. The people, who worked at the estate, also shunned me, so there was no way I would be raised with pride. I, who was mismatched, because I was raised as a commoner and could behave like a noble. I couldn't find the meaning to being a noble because I loved my commoner mother. Life with mother. My mother was in a terrible condition the first time I'd returned home from the estate after being forced to go there. She had become so thin. The reason why she'd become so thin was that her own child had suddenly disappeared from her side and didn't return for more than 3 weeks. Even if she knew where I'd gone, she couldn't tend her. She probably worried endlessly. She just barely managed to divert herself by sorting our personal belongings. Did no one explain to her what was happening to me? But my father visited my mother's place. I was worried about my mother, but since I could only come once every 2 days, she wanted to talk about how I was. Before I knew it, we were only talking about me. Even though I wasn't trying to be apathetic, my mother would often display the spirit of being gentle to women and children. I'm also a woman, you know? Is it out of my range? But, you know, it's fine for you to be more affectionate to your own child, you know? Were you that scared of Furuosama? Well, let's just say that it was good that my father was by my mother's side when I wasn't. If my mother can be relieved by my father's visits, then there was nothing better than that. The feelings of not wanting to worry my mother grew when I saw her worn out figure. That was why I only told her the good things about the estate. I told her things like the delicious food I ate and how I could read now. I tried very hard to help my mother whenever I was with her. I cleaned, as well as drew the water for cooking meals. I did the washing and even farmed. For farming, I pulled out the weeds and put the vegetables into the soil. But it didn't change the fact that this was important for us, who had very few food resources. I used the knowledge I'd gained from the books at the estate to increase our harvest. I fermented the vegetable waste to make fertilizer. My mother didn't have any experience in farming, so she praised me a lot. Of course, people worked harder when they were praised. Unlike when I was at the estate, I could honestly show my emotions when I was with my mother. I would laugh at silly things or when I was being clumsy. I would cry if I tripped while running and my mother would caress my hair while I slept in her lap. How fulfilling it was. The gardener's work cabin was mine and my mother's castle. My sewing skills got really good under the guidance of my mother, who was an excellent seamstress. Like my mother, my forte was embroidery. At the age of 10 I surpassed noble standard levels. I don't remember Miss Dulcie ever getting angry at my embroidery. Hee. I was able to work at my mother's side job. I was already a pro. I studied about housework and farming. My life got busier when I got the side job, but I didn't suffer because I thought about how earning more money would improve our lifestyle. I didn't know how the 1000 house would treat me when I grew up. They might marry me off into some old man's house because he desired noble blood. Would they pay my dowry since I was the 3rd daughter? It seemed likely that they would detain me at the estate so that they could treat me as a servant. But I couldn't be sure right at this time because Furuosama didn't want to see my face at all. In any case, I decided to save up a little for my future life with my mother. As I grew older, I had to do my own cleaning and washing whenever I was at the estate. Because it was work a maid could do. Everyone knew that I did these things whenever I was at the gardener's work cabin. Well, they did prepare my meals for me. I think the servants pitied me a little when I was younger. They began to feel jealous and were unreasonable when I grew older, because they found out that I did the same work as them. Whenever I was at the estate, they had to do the minimum to treat me as a lady. I didn't notice that they had turned their anger towards my mother. I, who sometimes lived at the estate, gained more acquaintances both good and bad. They became involved with me, so whenever I go to the kitchen to get food for my mother and me, I would receive them. But they would more or less grumble about it. That was when I went to the kitchen, but when my mother went, she would receive less food, especially meat. They must have pilfered it. My father would bring confectionaries whenever he visited my mother, but he didn't bring meat. Her mental grief was gone, but she was physically worn out and it slowly ruined her health. She could have brought food from town if she wasn't getting enough, but she didn't because she saw how happy I was saving. My mother passed away when I was 14, after I got the confirmation that I would debut in high society. My mother's golden hair turned white. 06, thus I became the person I am. My mother's cold dragged on, and one morning when I'd noticed, she'd passed away. The doctor, who came to investigate her cause of death, said that she had passed away from a heart attack. When I thought back on it now, we went through a cycle of living together and then separating again, which resulted in her dieting a lot, and that was taxing on her body. I was told that her hair got lighter because of her age, but I don't know, because it could be from something else altogether. That's why I eat properly. My time learning noble education decreased after my debut in high society. Miss Dulcie gave me a report saying that I mastered my education at my debut. My sisters continued to study mannerism and elegant behavior. Around this time, my irregular stays at the estate of 3 weeks every 2 months disappeared, and I would sometimes stay for a night or two when my father asked me to do work for him. Even if I said it was work, it was just copying documents that I had no trouble reading or doing calculations. I mainly commuted to and from the gardener's workshed to do washing and cleaning. I feel more liberated after my study time disappeared and felt that I should do my best at my side jobs. That was when my mother died. My mother passed away, and the sadness of great loss stayed with me the whole time. Because my feelings were somewhat lacking, my tears flowed down by themselves when I suddenly noticed that she was gone. My father and we were the only two to attend my mother's funeral. My mother was buried in a cemetery outside of town. My mother didn't have any relatives. If she did, then she wouldn't choose to live inside of my father's estate like a mistress. I've also heard that she was the daughter of a failed merchant. That was why I thought studying to gain knowledge was important and that having a profession was valuable. I looked at my father, who was crying, and understood that he loved my mother in his own way. However, I still don't understand what romantic love is. Won't you live at the estate? Thank you for your offer, but I want to live as I have been now. I said very politely. I ridiculed myself for being this polite towards my own father. It might have been difficult to do everything alone, but I decided that it was fine as long as I didn't have to stay at that uncomfortable place for long. I wanted to live at the gardener's work cabin, which held memories of my mother. I haltingly raised these points to him. My father looked a little sad, and unfortunately my wish wasn't granted. There was no way a noble young lady would be able to live by herself. I moved to my room at the estate after I cleaned up the gardener's work cabin. After the funeral, when everyone was gone, I cried my heart out for the first time. My brother, Gerlin, mainly helped my father manage his territory. In a few years, when he marries, he would become the feudal lord. Unfortunately, maybe because his expectations were too high, but he still doesn't have a fiancée. That was a taboo word. My brother, Gerlin, was my escort for my debut in high society. He had the same cold-hearted appearance as Furuosama, and I never got used to it. Instead of feeling happy about dancing at my first official occasion, I was worrying about what would happen if I stepped on Gerlin's toes. After that, I wasn't invited to dance at an official place again. Debut in high society was one of the things that the nobles attached to a family register had to do. If your name was in the family register and you didn't debut by the age of 16, then the royal family would investigate your house under the assumption that your existence was denied. At that point, the house is already out, but if it was found out that that person had really been murdered or abused, then they would be punished accordingly. Nobles follow the royal family and they are protected accordingly. Well, my treatment at my house wasn't good, but my life wasn't in danger. I was also given the opportunity to study many things, so I was probably blessed in a way. There wasn't many opportunities to meet Furuosama outside of dinner time. Even if Furuosama attended the ball, I never met her. She didn't want to see me, so she kept her distance. I would eat in the dining room with whoever was in the estate when I was there. When no one was there, I asked the servants to portion the meal they were having and eat it in my room. I have to eat properly. That was the iron rule. The servants also began to listen to what I say after I lived in the estate. However, I don't ask them for anything excessive. I would basically do things for myself. Just like my mother taught me to. So, I wash my own bed sheets and underwear and clean my own room. My older sisters reached a marriageable age and they were busy with tea parties and balls. They would wear fashionable dresses and trendy accessories. They didn't think of anything but improving themselves. The dresses that became unfashionable were passed down to me one after another. Their harassment never stopped, no matter how much time had passed. It was enough that I, who didn't show my face to high society, had dresses to wear. Because it was only necessary for me to wear dresses when I met my family. Made clothes that weren't too wide around the sleeves and hem were enough for cleaning and washing. Everything worked out the way I wanted when Furursama and my older sister spread the rumor that she's an eccentric girl who doesn't like to leave the house and isn't interested in high society. I didn't go to social occasions, but I was well trained on how to behave myself and on how I should appear to others, so I got good at it. My standing was a little lower in front of my family, and I obeyed what they said without opposing them. No matter how I thought about it in my mind. Although I was only a half-blood, I was a daughter of a noble and was not allowed to go to town by myself. They also wouldn't prepare a carriage for me to go out by myself. However, I went to town many times with my mother when I was younger. I could sneak out of the estate by climbing a crumbled wall. If I was a normal noble's daughter, I wouldn't do something like this. I walked down memory lane. I changed the appearance of the maid's outfit. If I added embroidery to it, then it became street clothes. I tied my hair in a ponytail. I looked like a common girl. I visited the clothes store I was familiar with like this and told them that I couldn't work here anymore. Instead, I showed them the handkerchief I had embroidered and they brought it. This earned me some pocket money. I was able to regain my peace of mind by walking around town and talking like a common girl. As I thought, common life suited me more. 07, normal noble girl. I do things for myself. This was natural for me, so I didn't mind doing work that maids do. But I didn't want to take care of someone like maids did. I didn't think I could work for nobles because I didn't have a good impression of them. No matter how high the wages were. Well, if it was all business and only for a short amount of time, then I might be able to do it for money. On the contrary, I couldn't imagine being thoroughly taken care of by someone as a noble lady. It's impossible. Disgusting. I didn't have a problem living as a seamstress like my mother. Even if I was poor. As long as I could secure a place to live. I didn't have enough savings for that. Why do I have to think of the future now? Well, before they reached adulthood, most people dreamed that they would be appointed in the royal castle as a civil official, where they would get a promotion, or they would dream of falling in love with a wonderful gentleman. Stories with plots like that were written for young adults. I think I want a friend my age before any of that. I've never experienced friendship, deception, or had any rivals like those depicted in books. The people around me were like walls? Mountains? Love? Now that I think about it, I liked the young man from the butcher, that I occasionally visited, who gave me extra meat. It was more like I was happy to be fed than first love. But he has already become an uncle with a belly. When I saw Miss Dulcie in the estate corridors after a long time, she also recommended me a book to read. It was also aimed at young adults. The book was published a while ago, but I went to the library to borrow what my sisters have probably read and somehow managed to make time to finish reading. Those were my impressions from a while ago. As I thought, I don't have the same feelings as a normal noble girl. Did Miss Dulcie want me to learn the dreams of young people? I'll just memorize it for information. My life didn't change for the better, so the book became good motivation. One day, the head maid took notice of the maid clothes that I had embroidered. To prevent my skills from rusting, I had embroidered the hem with a cloth of the same color, so it wouldn't stand out. I entwined leaves and flowers together like an ivy plant. The hem would roll up and you could see my feet. Was something I couldn't say out loud. The head maid stared silently at the stitches and traced the embroidery with her fingers. The embroidery was small and it was stitched in navy blue, which was the same color as the cloth, so I thought it wouldn't stand out. There wasn't enough space, so I also embroidered at the back of the hem. It seemed that she noticed this as well. "Did you stitch this embroidery? You saw it, didn't you?" "You know I did, don't you?" I wanted to say but resisted and nodded instead. From then on, I stitched more dresses with embroidery. If this was a job, then I would receive money for it. I received the materials to stitch with, but of course I couldn't refuse when Führer-sama or my sisters asked me to stitch for them. It was a relief that they didn't order me to finish it faster. Why did the head maid, who should be by Führer-sama's side, encounter me on this day? God only knows. But I was able to work at the gardener's work cabin, where I lived with my mother, using embroidering as a pretext. My mother had left plenty of embroidery designs there, because we needed the flowers sketches to make new designs. Dust had piled up in the cabin, so I cleaned, then I boiled some water on a portable stove. I picked some mint from the field that had been left to run wild and brewed some mint tea. Ah! My voice leaked out. It's been a while since I haven't been under the gazes of others in the daytime on estate ground. I moved my hand against the table and drew an embroidery design. I'll ordered around the estate a lot with sketching paper, so I could sneak out of the estate and go to town more often. My father also helped with my outings. Even though I could go more often, at most it was once every 10 days. The number of shops selling handicraft items increased. I planned to buy plain handkerchiefs to stitch in my spare time, and then I'll sell it at the Western clothing store for income. I stare at the people on the streets and confirmed the current trends, the colors and patterns. Nobles loved fashionable things and the people on the streets mimicked them. I didn't see any nobles on the streets, so how do they know what nobles liked? Even I love pretty and beautiful things, but I don't think about wearing them myself. They might have found out that I've been to town. But I didn't feel guilty, maybe because I could stitch embroidery that others can't mimic, or because I could accurately do the work my father assigned me, or because I just didn't care. It turned out all right in the end. Oh wait, turning point, I was still copying documents and doing calculations for my father even when I was 15 years old, but it seemed that my work gained a lot of popularity, so the documents handed to me now covered a lot of topics. It didn't even take half a day to get to the territory my father managed from the royal capital by carriage. It was smaller than the territories managed by other nobles, but the rivers were rich and the territory gained profits by agriculture. It was relatively close to the royal capital, so Gerlin and father went there once a week. When they returned, they put reports together of information they received from the territory, and it has recently become my job to help them out. I didn't have any friends, so the information wouldn't leak to other people. Because I didn't go to tea parties or balls. Well, I was a member of the 1000 House, so I'll protect what I have to protect. I was raised like that after all. It was unfortunate that I had less time to embroider. The things my father asks me to do is first priority. Even though they were simple statements, I was able to understand the statements while dealing with similar ones, even if I didn't have enough information. However, I didn't show that I understood these statements. My specialty was finding important information even if I didn't have a lot to go on. Because I've lived in various ways. I gained the trust of my father and my older brother by doing my job properly. Gerlin's eyes were still cold, but sometimes he would instruct me on how to do the documents. It had been a long time since my older brother has talked to me directly, so I was really surprised and couldn't answer him back. He clicked his tongue at me. I was even asked to go to the royal library. My father must have known that I went to the estate library whenever I had spare time. I only went to find things I couldn't understand. He may have thought I liked books because the catalog were filled with my name. If he'd looked closely at the catalog, he could see Encyclopedia of Plants, Stain Removal Tips, or the Standard Classic Noble Almanac. Basically, everyone in the 1000 House had important books in their rooms, so they wouldn't go to the library like I do. I guess it was also a reward. When I went to the office after lunch, My father gave me a note and said, "Borrow this book from the Royal Library. Return before it gets dark." I understand. You can go by carriage. I was surprised at my father's unexpected words and couldn't reply straight away. My feelings appeared on my face at times like this. I'm sure I looked very surprised. I got dressed and went to the entrance. The coachman was waiting for me with a reluctant look on his face. If he had displayed this attitude to a noble, then they would berate him, but I've stayed at this estate for a long time and couldn't talk in a stern manner. It was the first time I've ridden a carriage since my debut. Furthermore, I was riding by myself. I was the only one in the carriage. Even being in here motionlessly was too good for me. I peeked at the town from the curtain gap. No one was here to rebuke me or tell me that it was rude. It was my first time to see these kinds of sceneries. I was really excited. It's been a long time since I felt like this. The Royal Library was midway between the upper district where many nobles lived and the lower district where many commoners lived. Anyone can use the library. I heard that they had a range of books there, from picture books to technical books. An ID was needed to borrow books. I also knew where the library was, but it was far from the estate and I didn't have enough time to walk there. Whenever I snuck away, I could only go to the lower district, which was a 30-minute walk from the estate. Do you know how excited I am? The carriage stopped and I got off. "Please be here at 4 o'clock. I nodded my head in reply to the coachman. I walked along the stone pavement that ran between the lawn and appeared in front of the Royal Library. I stopped and looked up at the building. How big! I also knew that I was smirking. I hastily looked down. No matter how out of fashion my dress was, people near me would still think I was a noble's daughter. It was bad to smirk, wasn't it? I entered the library with a look that said nothing was wrong. The rustic stone building didn't have many windows, but it was bright inside. I wonder how many tens of thousands of books were here. There's a smell of unique books. I looked at the guide map and saw that there were also 2 basement floors. The only nobles I see were my family, so I was nervous whenever I passed someone that looked like a noble. We passed each other with a bow. But it was amazing that I could remember who they were from the descriptions in the Noble Almanac. The book my father wanted me to borrow for him was in a section that only nobles could enter. I started walking after deciding that I would quickly get the book and then look in other sections. I showed the letter of introduction from my father and entered the section that only nobles could enter. People rarely went in and out of this section, unlike the other sections. The book my father asked for was related to tax yields and seemed to be placed under the law section. There were a lot of books lined up on the shelves. This section occupied 8 rows on a large shelf. I found the book I needed straight away, but there was a thick book near it which looked like it had been used a lot. I inadvertently reached for the thick book. I sat down on the chair that was next to the shelf and turned the pages. It was a law book on nobles. I found it. I didn't know why that page was opened. I thought that my breath would stop. When I'd noticed, I was waiting for the carriage while holding the book my father asked for. There was still time left before the carriage came, so all I could do was stand there. The other translator contacted me and said that they would be dropping this project. "Oh 9, my first. Are you okay?" A young man called out to me, probably because my stupefied figure stood out a lot. I, who was startled back into consciousness, stared at the young man's black hair and sky blue eyes and remembered that he was at the reception area for the section that only nobles could use. He saw the introduction letter that my father wrote, but he probably didn't know who I was. For better or for worse, I probably didn't leave much of an impression with my out-of-fashion dress. There weren't many people with sky blue eyes. Furthermore, I confirmed a while ago that there was only one person with black hair around his age. I hastily smiled in return and bowed. Even though this was the carriage stop for noble daughters, standing here alone was nothing but careless. Idos Dunwar Sama. Thank you for your concern. I am sorry for showing you such an impolite side of me. As you can see, there is nothing wrong. Also, a carriage will be coming here directly, so I am fine. Even though I have the knowledge, I have never done more than greet nobles outside of my family. It's been a long time since I've talked with someone for this long. I wonder if it was strange. I have to get away from this person before Mara comes. I hid the lower half of my face with the book that I'd borrowed for my father and pretended to be shy. He probably won't get involved any more than this. You know my name, so we must have met before, haven't we? Are you a daughter of the Thousand House? Even though I didn't want to talk to him anymore. I was the only one in the Thousand House with blonde hair. Even though he works at the library, didn't he read the Noble Almanac properly? I hid my dubious look and plastered a smile on my face in reply. Count Noir is the only young man with black hair and sky blue eyes in the Noble Almanac. I am Aisha Maria from the Thousand House. I really am fine, so please don't mind me. I'm glad he's from in Count House. If this was a higher ranking noble, then I would certainly be puzzled over how to forcibly end the conversation. Count Noir seemed like a quiet and good person. I looked down and gave off a troubled aura. He probably won't continue to talk anymore, right? Lady Aisha Maria. I will excuse myself then. Talk to me again if you're at the library. I slowly looked up and saw that Count Noir was already in a carriage 2 meters away. I relaxed my shoulders in relief and Count Noir looked back. He smiled and waved at me. Did I do something to attract his attention? This was the first time my name had been called a male. I smiled wryly. The carriage from the Thousand House came and I rode it back to the estate as if nothing had happened. I came back to the estate just as my father and Furursama was leaving the house in formal wear. They're in formal wear, so were they going to a ball? It's been a long time since I've seen Furursama in formal wear. She was beautiful and you couldn't tell her age at all. Furursama was usually cold, but when she was with my father she would cling to him. I could understand somehow that she loved him dearly. I stuck to the wall as usual, and lowered my gaze to the ground emotionlessly. I bowed. Shamaria, you were able to borrow the book without any problems. Yes. I replied to him while keeping my head down. Even though I couldn't see it, Furursama's cold gaze was piercing my whole body. You went outside while wearing that? You're not using the Thousand House name while looking like that, are you? I couldn't tell her the truth. What would happen afterwards? I could only remain silent. I had that much common sense. Oh. We don't have any time left. She only handed the introduction letter that I gave her. So she probably didn't know who she gave it to. My father said while putting his hands around Furursama's hips and left. Who I gave it to? Really? Hair and eyes, we can narrow down the age too. My father didn't read the Noble Almanac a lot, did he? He had the chance to meet the nobles face to face, so he knew who they were without reading the almanac. The two were dressed up quite magnificently, so the ball was probably very big. My brother and sisters were probably also invited. Then I should go receive food from the kitchen for dinner. A lot of my alone time was taken. So it was just right. I thought thoroughly about what I found in the library. I headed to the office to deliver the book. The night was long today. The next day, a dress that wasn't out of fashion was delivered to my door, even though there were no decorations. It was my first time seeing a new product. She was probably telling me to wear this when I went out. I wonder if I still had opportunities to go outside. I still had to live like I was told to. 10. Discovery. I'm surprised that the maid had delivered something that wasn't hand-me-downs. It's the first time I've received a new dress, even if it was ready-made. I could only smile wryly because there were no decorations. I guess it was hard to find. I've never seen such a simple dress before. They might even have taken the decorations off themselves. The dress was light brown. Or should I say the color was like milk tea? I didn't see this color much. As a member of the Thousand House I couldn't dress shabby, but on the other hand I hated dressing up. The result was this dress, huh? This was probably the Furursama's greatest compromise. I laughed when I thought that in my mind. I've never demanded clothes to dress up in. Even if I was at a marriageable age, I believe that it was fine to wear clothes that are clean. I also know the difference between luxury goods and generic goods and the latest embroidery trends because I went to the Western clothing store. But that was just knowledge that I had, it had nothing to do with me. The fabric isn't stiff. It's soft. Even I was happy to receive a brand new dress with good quality. I hugged the dress tightly. My treatment at the estate is getting better now since I've started helping my father and brother with their work. They acknowledge me because I can do paperwork. And I've been living here for more than 10 years, so the harsh treatment and neglect from the servants have decreased. It was better for me to not have any connections with them. Once again, as a noble I couldn't talk in a stern manner. I thought a lot in my room last night. The maids won't relit the lamp, even if I use it till late until it runs out of fuel. So I'm early to bed and early to rise. If I thought in bed then it wouldn't be a problem even if the room was dark. I would usually fall asleep when I thought about a lot of things. But that didn't happen last night. There was a sentence that I wanted in the noble law book I found at the library. An illegitimate child born from a noble and commoner and their name exists in both registers, and when the person reaches adulthood, they'll have to apply for removal from one of the registers. However, it'll only be accepted in case the person themselves apply for removal from one of the family registers. I remembered the two sentences that concern me. It was written in smaller text than the other laws, so I felt like they did that on purpose. I wonder if they didn't want people to know. No one has ever taught me that I could choose to be a noble or a commoner. Was it less likely to be accepted? Illegitimate children born between nobles had backing, and they probably wouldn't want to be commoners since they were strongly thought as nobles. Even if it was an illegitimate child from a commoner, they would be treated as nobles, and would also think like nobles. Did they do their best to create this law because an illegitimate child was born from a commoner a long time ago? I wasn't treated as a noble and I was blessed as a commoner. I was a halfway existence. What did my mother want me to do? Did she want me to live as a noble? Did you believe that I was living as a noble just because the only thing you were told was that I was living well at the estate? Did you want to believe that? I was proud to do the same things as my mother when I lived with her in the gardener's work cabin. I didn't hate being smeared in dirt or getting my hands dirty. She might have wanted me to become a noble who understood the feelings of commoners. But why didn't I call her mother one? I called her Mom, Kasan, didn't I? It's not like I've always wanted to be a noble. I would say that I didn't want to get involved with them. I listened to my father in order to protect my mother and tried to be a noble. I learned how to impersonate them. I believed that it would protect her. The result was that I'll remove myself from the noble register. I've got a goal. Now, I have to make reasons for why they should accept my removal from the register. Could not being treated well at the estate be used as a reason? Come to think of it, alright, let's get my family and the servants to treat me harshly again. Welcome. I have to keep my father's work a secret or else I won't be able to leave this house. I have to make them think I'm not useful. It'll be good if I can show them that I can live independently even as a commoner. I will improve my embroidery skills more. It's better if I know how to cook and do housework, right? Should I help out in the kitchen as well? I should be able to do more things for myself. There were more and more things that I wanted to do. This was the first time I've felt like this. I have thought about living outside of the estate before, but I didn't have any definite goals. That's why I was always sensitive to others' moods and thought that I had to listen to what they told me to do. In any case, I have to negotiate with Father, who's also the head of the 1000 house. My mother words suddenly floated into my mind. You can't push your opinions. If you want the other person to listen to you, you have to listen to their request as well. You have to look at the person in their eyes and talk if you want to convey how you feel. First, let's have a proper look at my surroundings. The only thing that I was worried about was that if I quit being a noble as soon as I become an adult, then it would be impossible to fulfill my duty to follow the royal family as a noble. Would they demand something from me instead? Would something be done before that? If I could move freely, then I would go to the noble register department and ask them myself. The other thing I was worried about was being married off while I'm waiting to become an adult. Fortunately, my father worked as a curator at the royal palace. He would regularly air out paintings and antiques that have been handed down in the royal family as well as maintain them. His department wasn't receive much budget. It was a simple but necessary department. My father was excellent as a connoisseur, but he didn't handle large amounts of money in his department, nor did he have to frequent the royal palace a lot. So there weren't any nobles or merchants who were proactively trying to make connections with my father. That was also one of the reasons why my older brother, Gerlin, and my older sister still haven't got fiancés. Well, I think it's also because they're looking for someone better than them. I don't think there would be any house that would want me as a bride just because they want the 1,000 blood. They couldn't expect a dowry, my looks were average, and I couldn't behave like a noble in high society. I don't think the 1,000 house would present me as a bride. But it's not like there's no possibility of me being a bride. Another possibility was that they would make me work as a tutor or as a maid in a high-ranking house. I don't think I have the capacity for that, and it was probably hard to handle illegitimate children of nobles and commoners. Yup, as I thought, becoming a commoner is the best choice. Most of all, I want to become one myself, so there weren't any problems. 11. Older sister's request. I didn't see Furursama nor my older sisters outside of meal times unless they needed me. For me, noble conversations was something to recall during meal times. I listened attentively to my sisters gossiping and talking about the latest fashion trends. That's why I think the things I know are a little biased. Even so, it might be useful to know. I didn't go out as a noble, so there were many things that I couldn't imagine even if I heard them. One of the things I couldn't imagine was a knight. I've seen soldiers who guard the town patrolling on horses before. There might have been some knights at the place where I had my debut, but it's not like they had a sword, and I was also nervous, so I couldn't tell who was a knight and who wasn't. I can only imagine them from book illustrations. I knew which person was a knight from the noble almanac though. I also had a glimpse of the high-ranking nobles at my debut. No one took me to greet the nobles. The royals I met at my debut were very far away and I could only gleam at them. I saw their portraits in the noble almanac. It seems that my older sister Catherine is aiming to marry into a high-ranking noble house. She was already 18 years old and she grew more discerning as the year passed. She didn't want to compromise on her marriage partner. My sister's tactic was to appeal her embroidery skills. In short, she wanted to give a handkerchief that I had embroidered to a man. The handkerchiefs I sold to the Western clothing store were now on sale. Embroidered handkerchiefs has now become one of the popular items for nobles. I simply embroidered initials for small change, but the design Catherine wanted was of her initials intertwined in a rose. She wanted to carry this around while broadcasting. Embroidery is my strong point. Then finally, because I'm good at embroidery, the person I'm thinking of would be incredibly happy if I gave him a handkerchief as a present. She told someone and asked me to embroider something for her. Ashamri, I have a favor to ask of you. I already learned that if the family asked me for something like this I couldn't refuse most the time. I'd like to give a nice handkerchief to Raven Sama. I want you to do the embroidery. Could you do this for me? I was drinking pumpkin soup, but I put the spoon onto the table and wiped my mouth with a cloth before turning towards Catherine. I complied with her request without being able to refuse. The thing that Catherine had asked me to embroider was a little troubling. She wanted to put her initials and the initials of her intended onto the handkerchief, as well as his family crest. If I looked in the noble almanac then I would know his crest. But it was in black and white. I had to confirm the color somehow. He was from a frontier count house and it was a present for a higher ranking noble, so I couldn't do a poor job. Fortunately, she had asked this during mealtime, so my father also heard it. Catherine's request had more priority over the job my father asked me to do, so I didn't have to help him for a while. Older sister Rosalie also seemed to be good at embroidery, and the ladies of the 1,000 house were called experts at embroidery that had passed noble standards. I recall embroidering for them because they were too busy with tea parties and balls. I think they're all made by me though. When the truth comes out, what will you do, sisters? I wonder if they would be able to deceive them with words. Well, They should make sure that they become good at embroidery. Thankfully, I think that my good point, which I inherited from my mother, is to tackle problems head on and solve them. Under normal circumstances, I lived my life facing down, so at least my heart should be uplifted. Thus, I diligently commuted to the gardener's work cabin to make designs and snuck out of the estate in maid clothes. I went to the upper district and somehow managed to see the Raven House crest myself. The upper district was really far, so it was really difficult to get there. My cleaning and washing time decreased and my embroidery time increased because of Catherine's demand. I completed it 10 days later. Knock knock, I knocked on Catherine's room door. I came to give her the handkerchief that I'd finished. Whenever I entered her room, I would choke on the perfume smell of flowers. I happened to see some multicolored cushions. I always think that her room is really girly. I have finished the handkerchief that older sister Catherine asked me to make, so I came to deliver it. Catherine took the handkerchief and looked at it. Her eyes squinted in pleasure. Ah, it looks like she's satisfied. This handkerchief had a lot of embroidery on it, so it wasn't practical. There was so much embroidery on it that it would probably look great hung on a wall. I knew you were the one for the job. I've never seen anything like this before. I always admire your embroidery skills. With this I'll be able to give Raven-sama a good impression of me. I am honored by your praise. It took a lot of time, but in exchange, I was able to make something good. Catherine seemed to be in a good mood, so this time I insinuated that this was more troublesome than usual. My sister got what I was trying to say. I'll give you this. She gave me a flower-shaped brooch. She seemed to be in a really good mood. It looked much more expensive than the ones I saw in town. I received it with gratitude. I probably won't use it, but I can exchange it for money if I need to in the future. This time, I got a reward and improved my embroidery skills. I also had many opportunities to go into town. Preparing gifts for someone. Catherine, who was staring at the finished handkerchief lovingly, was impressive. She was probably in love, wasn't she? Would I ever embroider a gift for someone someday? However, my relief over finishing the handkerchief only lasted a brief moment. Rosalie, who Catherine had shown the handkerchief to, asked me to make her a handkerchief to give to Elmer-sama. Although, I had expected this. 12. Daily routine. My father and Fuhrer-sama didn't want to invite me to tea parties or night balls. I don't know if they couldn't stand letting other families see me, or they just didn't want to pay money to dress me up. Or did they just want to neglect me? I didn't see that glamorous world, nor was I exposed to nobles and their ill intentions. I guess I was protected in a way. However, my father spoke to Count 1, Noir at a night ball just a little while after I ran my errands at the library. It's been a long time, Earl Thousand. I met Lady Aisha Maria for the first time the other day. She doesn't appear to be here tonight. Is she doing well? My father was troubled when my name came out of Count Noir's mouth. It was very fortunate that Fuhrer-sama wasn't by his side at this time. The curators and librarians were acquainted with each other through their works. The next day, when I went to the office to draw up documents, my father asked me questions like, "What did you tell Count Noir? And did you act in a way that would make him worry?" "Nothing really," was all I could say to him. I think the Count saw me when I was in a daze. I can't say that he thought I was weird. My father was fine, but I didn't want to provoke Fuhrer-sama. I was deeply traumatized when I was hit by the folding fan when I was younger. I vowed that I wouldn't approach Count Noir even if I met him. I didn't want to be friends nor acquaintances with nobles. They didn't tell me that I had to go to tea parties or night balls after that. I sneaked out of the estate whenever I wasn't drawing up documents and went to town to observe the common way of life. I won't live in the royal capital if I become a commoner. I don't want to live there. Some of the citizens that frequent town knew who I was, but they didn't say it out loud. That's why me becoming a commoner would become the subject of gossip, no matter why I was doing it. Even so, the slums is scary, so I didn't want to live there, and I would need to ride a carriage to get to cities outside of the royal capital. I don't think a teenage girl can live leisurely in the countryside. I need to gather more information. First of all, I needed money if I wanted to settle somewhere. I had the savings that my mother and I secretly saved for a long time, but it wasn't a large amount. I would become an adult soon and then I can become a commoner, but first I need to save more money. Embroidering handkerchiefs only gave me pocket money. Now that embroidering was in fashion, it was fine to earn a little more. So I thought about embroidering organdy 2 stoles. I gave the designs a twist. I used an illustration book to stitch the flowers and butterfly more realistically. By doing so, it looked like real flowers intertwining together and the butterfly looked as if it had landed on the person's shoulders. This would look good even if nobles wore it over their dresses. I took it to the Western clothing shop and the shop owner looked really pleased as they brought my stoles. The shop owner told me that they wanted more, but it was impossible because I embroidered the stoles when I wasn't doing paperwork. So I tried asking the store owner if they wanted to buy the design. And surprisingly they did. My ideas and designs have become money. This made me very confident, and it was useful to know that my skills could be used to make money. A noble lady learned bargaining skills from attending tea parties and night balls, but I learned how to bargain by negotiating with shopkeepers in town. Oh yes, I asked for discounts from food stalls. Would nobles receive discounts? I have to use what little money I have carefully. After that, I didn't have the chance to talk to my father about becoming a commoner after I reached adulthood, even if I met him when I helped out with his paperwork. I couldn't discuss this with him if I didn't have the chance, and time just passed by. I didn't have the chance to wear that milk tea colored dress either. One day, when I met Miss Dulcie in the corridor, she muttered, "The way you walk isn't elegant at all." I knew it. In order for people not to notice that I was a noble, I would tramp and straddle whenever I went into town. Since the maid's uniform wasn't a dress, I could step very widely and my behavior was sloppy. I had intended to act different inside of the estate and outside, but I overestimated myself. I was also summoned the next day when my sisters had their dance lesson. I wore dresses whenever I met my family in the estate, and I had to wear high heels for dancing. Miss Dulcie taught me a lot of the latest dance steps. "Teacher, I don't attend night balls, so I won't have the chance to dance." I didn't say that out loud. She should know this though. I hadn't danced in a long time, but I went out to town a lot, so I wasn't tired. However, the muscles that I didn't normally use were in horrible pain the next day. It was unavoidable since I didn't move with grace since long ago. Miss Dulcie, who saw this, wanted to check my mannerism. My homework was to make tea every day. She comes when I forget about it. It feels like she heard about it from somewhere. Miss Dulcie doesn't let me forget that I'm also a member of noble society. 13. A useful thing: summer was here. Summer wasn't humid in Fernand Empire, but it was really hot. I'm glad that my sweat dried immediately. Everyone in my family would be going to the holiday villa in our territory this summer as well, or they would be helping out at the royal palace because they were short-handed from all the people returning home. The servants at the residence would also be going back with my family. Having hardly anyone here was good. But as usual, I would spend my time in my room, the gardener's work cabin, or my father's office. I went to town whenever I had time. I had to get my meals from the kitchen like I usually do when my family wasn't at the estate. I aimed to take my meal when my father was out and there were only a little number of servants at the estate. I tried asking the estate chef if I could help him. The chef remembered my face, but I've only ever greeted him and he returned my greetings. His attitude wasn't cold like the maids or chamberlains. He probably hated getting nobles to cook, but I thought he would let me help out a little. I was only a half-blood and I could tell him that I can cook a little. It was annoying, but I got changed into a maid dress and headed to the kitchen. I couldn't let my dress get dirty. It would be nice if he lent me an apron. I finished copying documents for my father and washed my sheets early in the morning. I can help with cooking right now. Excuse me. Is the head chef here? The head chef is a man in his 40s with a red scarf around his neck and a bit of a belly. His small eyes was impressive. This person has always been managing and cooking the 1,000 house meals. It would be good for me to use polite language to pay respect to his delicious cooking. Do you need something, Aja-sama? My eyes widen in surprise. Aja-sama. He was talking about me, wasn't he? This is the first time someone's called me that. The maids did call me Ashimori-sama, rarely. But usually they didn't use a subject word to call me. He looked at me from top to bottom. No, he was confirming who I was. I also looked back at him. Would be alright for me to help you with cooking? I said and lowered my head. You lower your head when asking for something. I, who didn't think it had anything to do with being a commoner or noble, was probably a minority amongst the nobles. The head chef was the one who was surprised this time. He was surprised at both my attitude and my words. I explained to the head chef that I wanted to learn how to cook, that I cooked together with my mother before, that I didn't want to get bad at cooking, that I didn't have much work to do for my father so I wanted to help out in the kitchen, and that I didn't hate doing the work that servants did. At first the head chef said things like, I need to ask the master first and this isn't something you should do, Aja-sama. But he lost to my persistence and said, you can help out when you really don't have anything to do. Ah, I'm so glad. I'm peeling potatoes under a big tree in the backyard. I've never peeled so much potatoes before. I could see a servant staring at me doubtfully. I work in silence. If I may say so myself, I was extremely bad with kitchen knives. I wonder if I'll improve if I keep using it. The head chef got angry before because I had peeled so much that there was only a little bit of potato left. What kind of dish will it become? Fururu-sama, my brother and sisters were at the territory. My father would be staying at the royal palace because of work. The potatoes were used to make a cold soup. I didn't eat in my room today. I ate on a table at the corner of the kitchen. The head chef was going to teach me how to cook. Eat more. Don't hold back. It's something you helped make. I always ate the food on the tray that I carried to my room. So I was full with just a bowl of soup. I harassed you by making you peel a lot of potatoes. You did your job properly even though you were bad at it. I'm sorry for testing you. The head chef looked at my hands. There was soil on my nails and some of the wounds had bled. He had a sharp tongue but it had been so long since someone had worried about me and my chest felt warm and fluffy. I hid my hands and the head chef smiled at me. It was a good lesson. Please teach me how to cook again. I hoped that your hands won't get messed up next time, Aja-sama. The head chef told me his name was Tom. He praised my chicken and tomato stew and the head chef taught me a trick to preserve taste. He's a friendly person. It's really been such a long time since I've eaten while talking to someone. I was thankful to the head chef because he didn't change his attitude no matter who he was talking to. My chest felt warm. To be able to feel like this inside of the estate, I've already forgotten how long it's been. It was reassuring to know that there was someone amongst the servants that recognized me as a person. Autumn has come. The harvesting season autumn. This was when the 1,000 house territory was the busiest. The harvest grains, vegetables and fruits were sent to the royal capital or turned into food that could last through winter. Naturally, more people and things were coming in and out of estates in the royal capital and territory. The number of notes also increased, so I also had a lot of work to do. Having a lot of notes meant that there was a lot of harvest coming from the territory, which equals a higher yield. This was a good thing for the 1,000 house. My older brother stayed at the territory and my father and I had to deal with the documents. Even the Grand Chamberlain was called to sort through the notes and documents. Fururu-sama and my older sisters were attending tea parties and night balls every day in order to advertise the territory's special products. I brought the documents in my room to my father's office and there was a guest. It was Marquis Oslo, the tax officer. He had smooth gray hair and thin, jittery eyes. He looked like a defenseless person. I would seclude myself in my room whenever guests came over and tried my best not to meet them. I wasn't informed that a guest had come, probably because the documents were needed urgently. I tried to leave quickly in order not to get in their way, but Marquis Soslow stopped me. He praised the documents I drew up. And he recommended that I work at the administration's office in the royal palace. I looked at my father and then at my feet. I didn't have anything to give my opinion on. My father frowned and politely declined Marquis Soslow's offer. It seems that I'm a girl who can't go out. Did my father plan on keeping me in this estate forever? I thought that I could bring up the topic of me wanting to become a commoner as a reward for doing my best during the harvest season. I continued to look at the ground, bowed deeply and left the room. 14. Harvest Festival. A stack of timber was burning bright red before me in the middle of a dimly lit plaza. A large crowd of people were cheerfully dancing around the fire. Well, rather than dance, they were just swaying their bodies to the music. In addition, there were food stalls all around and the aroma of the cooked meat drifted about, it mixed with aroma of confectionaries. People with flushed cheeks were sitting at tables drinking alcohol. The sky changed from indigo to jet black and the stars were sparkling in the sky. This was the Thousand House territory, Hoft. The secondary residence of the Thousand House was here. The Harvest Festival was being celebrated in the plaza on the outskirts of town. After completing the autumn harvest documents and tasks, I was taken here as a reward for helping out. My father and brother drank a new brew of wine with the town mayor and were having a good time talking. I sat at the table next to my father's and was having a light snack. Furor-sama and my older sisters probably won't come to a place with so many commoners. It was impossible for them to eat and drink with commoners outdoors. I wonder if my father had wanted to bring a female from the family here just for the sake of appearance. I remained seated on the chair while smiling after greeting the town mayor and influential people. It was noble mannerism. We had to look elegant and dignified without making it look like we were looking down on commoners. It was a good chance for me to show off the things that Miss Dulcie had taught me. It wasn't fun even if you were with a young lady if you both couldn't talk about anything. There was something fun in front of them. The mayor's wife and the wives of the influential people talked to me, but I didn't have any say and I faded from their view when they talked about standard topics. I continued to smile and looked around. After a while, my father and brother came to tell me that they would be moving around to go and thank the others for their work. Yes, I understand. I will be waiting here. I replied, and my father told me I could walk around. I know that you've been going to town every now and then. Entrance into this plaza is restricted, so there shouldn't be any dangerous people here. You can look around by yourself. Come back here in an hour. He said in a small voice and passed me some change before leaving. I stared at the teacup in front of me and drank the cold tea. My father knew what I did. I thought that he didn't know about it and preferred it that way. I realized that my father bringing me here was a real reward from being able to walk around the autumn harvest freely. I was wearing the milk tea dress and I put a green velvet ribbon from another dress around this one because it was rather plain. I had an organdy stole wrapped around me with a bright green butterfly embroidery around my chest area. I also attached the flower brooch I received from Sister Catherine. The maids at the second residence prepared my hair in a half updo, applied light makeup, and the image of an elegant noble was complete. I removed the brooch, redid my hair, and quietly entered the plaza from the main guest seats. Would I look like a slightly dressed up girl in this dim plaza? I was so excited because I was seeing the things that interested me up close. This was the first time I've been outside the mansion at night, not to mention being out on the streets. The stalls were different from those seen at the royal capital. I tried to be dignified. But my curiosity won and I looked at everything enthusiastically. There was hair clips made out of flame glazed glass, decorated lace chokers, small flower brooches, and so on. They were cheap accessories for nobles, but there was no such thing as an expensive or cheap accessory if it was cute. I couldn't keep my eyes off these items. There was chicken fried in oil, spare rib steak, dumplings coated with sugar, fruit glazed with candy, etc. There was also food I've seen before in the royal capital and those I haven't. People were noisy. I knew from my knowledge that bars were noisy and it felt similar to that. It'll be troublesome if you get meat grease on your dress. You probably want to eat it, but I don't recommend eating it while standing. I heard a voice in my ear and turned around. There stood a young man with dark brown hair and eyes. He looked 25. His clothing was rough and plain for a noble. I recalled the noble almanac in my head and some candidates came to mind, but I wasn't sure who he was. Good evening, Aisha Mariasama. I am a Race 1, Monterey. I'm the accountant for the 1000 House in Hoft. I was asked by your father to escort you. By the way, I'm not a noble. But it would be boorish to speak politely here, so I won't. He said indifferently. He was skilled at talking and left me no room for argument. He probably got information about me from my father. What happened to my father's you can walk around freely. I won't act badly. I just wanted to buy candy and go back. Then I'll recommend some to you. This candy apple can only be brought at the Harvest Festival. There's honey in the middle of the apple. It's a bit sweet for me, but I'd recommend it. If you buy it now, you can also buy a crepe. You've never eaten it before, have you? You eat it with your hands. Cream and fruits are stuffed into a cooked flour mixture, so it's popular with females. Race spoke a lot next to me. He smiled in return when I glanced at him. This is the first time I've experienced something like this. I inadvertently diverted my eyes. We didn't touch each other and I maintained my distance from him. But why were we overly familiar with each other? I wasn't used to people and my body froze. You don't have to be that cautious. I've seen the documents you've made. The writing was beautiful and easy to read. I was looking forward to seeing what kind of person wrote them. I'm sure you've seen many documents and letters written by me. What kind of information did my father and brother give to this man? Maybe they want me to marry into his house and work for the 1000 House forever? Then I definitely shouldn't get close to him. After that, I kept my distance from Race as best as I could, brought honey-filled apple and bone meat and returned to my table. If I was by myself I would have brought a hair clip as well, but Race was next to me, so I didn't feel like buying something that I would put on. He seemed like the type of person to say, "It's a present." I arrived at my table, took a knife and ate the bone meat that I had just brought. I don't know what a noble daughter would do, but I was angry. Race was staring at me with interest. He was actually asked to escort me from the plaza, but he was curious about me, so he stayed by my side. I didn't say a word about it. The Harvest Festival ended when my father and brother came back to the guest seats. We got into the carriage and went home to our secondary residence. No one at the secondary residence treated me differently. They treated me like a noble, and I was bewildered because their attitude was too different from those from the royal capital. Welcome home. I entered the estate after my father and brother and froze. How should I reply to that? My brother looked at me. "If you don't reply like a noble, then everyone will be troubled," he said while narrowing his brows together. "This is harassment, it isn't a reward." I held down my words. "Thank you for welcoming me home." I raised my head and said. My hair color told them who I was, and no one looked at me scornfully. I said, "Good night," to my father and brother and left. Hot water had been prepared for me when I passed the guest room. "Thanks for your good work," the maids said. They untied my hair and undressed me. I've seen my sister's servants do this before, but I've never had someone do this to me. It would be unbearable if they said they would wash my body, so I hurriedly said, "I'll wash myself later, so you can retire to your room." It was a bit snobby, but I remembered my sister's tone when I said it. The two maids went out of the room without any objections. I wonder how many years it's been since I've soaked in a hot bath. I stared at my fingers as water flowed between them. They were different from the fingers of a neglected noble. There was perfumed oil in the hot water. I usually get hot water and wipe my body down. If this is the reward, then I'd accept it gratefully. I washed my hair and body and felt like the smell of flowers was emitting from my body. I got out of the bath, and drying my hair was the only thing I asked the maid to help me with. Afterwards, I told them to only come if I called, and then I was the only one left in the room. If they always treat me like this, then I wouldn't want to stop being a noble anymore. I couldn't help but snort. Then I fell asleep on a bed that was more comfortable than normal. The next morning, we returned to the estate at the royal capital as soon as we finished breakfast. I rarely started conversations with my father, but I had something to say. It looked like he would be willing to listen to me now. I called out to my father before getting onto the carriage, "Thank you for bringing me with you this time." I pinched the hem of my out-of-fashion dress and curtsied. My father narrowed his eyes and looked troubled. "I'm glad you had a good time. Aisha Maria, I've had more opportunities to work with you and I thought that my treatment of you was a little bad. I can't change the impression Fyodor has of you, so I can't change how you're treated at the estate, but I've been thinking of improving that." Did his feelings for me change because he's been spending more time with the useful me? Still, the fact that Fyodor Sama was the most important to father didn't change. "What were your intentions when you asked Elias to escort me? Were you planning to marry me into his family? You met Elias? I did ask him to escort you, but you're very good at paperwork. You copied the documents and calculated like Miss Dulcie instructed you to. The latter works show that there's been a change in the way things are written and calculated. The people who saw the completed documents were curious about the person who had made it. Elias thinks very highly of you. But, if you were to marry into someone's house, I wouldn't let you go to a house that's been disregarded by your brother and sisters." Ha, I got the answer I wanted to hear. I said I wouldn't let you go, but you don't attend any tea parties or night balls, so you don't have a very good reputation. I don't think anyone would ask you to be a bride at their house. Oh, I'd prefer it if they didn't ask me to be a bride at their house. I looked down so that he wouldn't be able to see my smiling face and replied meekly, "I understand." My father and I boarded the carriage. I turned around for a second while I was boarding the carriage and turned towards the servants that were seeing us off. I smiled like a noble. After that, I silently looked at the scenery from the carriage window and thought over my plan of becoming a commoner. Being treated like a noble for a brief moment was merely a memory. I didn't get attached to being treated like a noble. Chapter 16, A Cold Winter Day. Yup, life doesn't always go as planned. Still, I want to think that things are changing little by little. I didn't have to help with my father's work much in winter, but a lot of evening parties and balls were held, so my family asked me to embroider a lot of dresses for them. My father had said something like, "I would like to improve your treatment at the estate, but not much has changed." I was treated half-hearted as a noble, or rather, my treatment was closer to that of a servant's. Well, I could use this cruel treatment as one of the reasons why I want to become a commoner, so for now it was welcomed. However, I didn't have the chance to tell my father that I've wanted to become a commoner since the opportunities to work with my father have decreased. I will turn 16 at the beginning of spring, the month when the flowers blossom. There was still time. Aisha Maria, the next dress is dark pink. Match it with a light pink organdy scarf and embroidery. Older sister Rosalie always asked me to do things like this. She was absorbed in dressing herself up in the latest fashion. The organdy scarf with realistic embroidery that I suggested in summer was still fashionable. My older sisters were known for their excellent embroidery skills, so they wore a lot of dresses that had magnificent embroidery on them. Therefore, I could embroider a lot. However, my father must have said something because recently whenever I'd give them the finished products they would give me confectionaries or things to adorn myself with as rewards. It was finally cold and I felt chilly even if they were burning firewood in the fireplace. Even if I went to the gardener's work cabin, spending a long time in there was extremely cold. It was best to use a duster to avoid dust accumulation. My father found out that I snuck off to town. I didn't have much time to go recently since the days were getting shorter. I still put on a maid outfit and snuck off to town through the broken wall, even if he knew that I went to town. Did someone see me somewhere? I looked around from time to time whenever I went to town, but I didn't see anyone. But I did feel that someone was guarding me or observing me. It was dangerous for a noble child to go out alone after all. But if they were going to do that much, then I wish they would have prepared a carriage for me to go to town in. I didn't care if anyone saw me anymore, so I started eating at the food stalls more often. My favorite food recently was sweet roasted chestnuts. I get bloated from it even if I just eat a little. I liked that I could bring it home with me. I firmly fastened the collar of my dark blue cloak and wore a woolen stole on top of it. It was the stole that I was going to sell to the Western clothing shop today. It was easy to embroider gorgeous designs onto plain woolen cloths, but the embroidery wouldn't shine if I embroidered it with a recent fashionable trend. Therefore, I thought about combining it with lace. The designs looked even more gorgeous when I sewed lace around the edges, so I did it more often. I sewed the lace in 3D and made it look like a flower. I thought about getting the shop to buy the design along with the sample stole. I wonder if they also told my father that I did things like this. But nothing has been said about my activities so far, so they probably didn't tell Furo-sama. She had high pride, so she would probably scorn me if she knew that I was mimicking pro artisans. I probably wouldn't be able to sell my products anymore if I was careless. That would be troublesome for me and the shop. I was able to successfully sell my woolen stole and design today, so I went to the handicraft shops. I brought detailed lace even though I couldn't use it. I also brought some different colored threads. I wouldn't receive money even if I buy a lot of lace or threads now. It was a secret that I went out to buy these things. I can give people samples, but no one paid for the important stuff. Thus, I had to control my expenses. Winter nights are long. I had more chances to help my sisters prepare for night parties. I went to their rooms whenever they called for me. Rather than help them, they bragged and showed off their dresses. I couldn't do their hair up for them, so the most I did was hand them things. I also praised my sisters' beauty so that they could leave the estate in a happy mood. They were probably used to getting praises since they were noble ladies, so I think they were already familiar with my praises. Also, my sisters would smile and their eyes would sparkle if I, who couldn't go out and seemed pitiful, said, "Balls are lovely, aren't they?" Recently, I've been enjoying the meals I have when everyone goes out. It was getting colder and the chefs made a lot of stew dishes. They couldn't serve it for a noble's dinner because the ingredients were mixed together. I was glad that I wasn't receiving cold food anymore from the kitchen ever since I started going there more. If I waited for my family to return from the evening parties and balls, then I could use the light in the antechamber and get a fire going in the fireplace while reading a book I brought from the library. I felt like the antechamber really brightened up when everyone returned because everyone had red hair except for my father. It was forbidden for me to stare at them, so I would lower my head like the other servants. But the piercing gazes Furo-sama sent my way was painful. Come to think of it, Count Denbar asked me if you were coming to the evening party, Aisha Maria. I was also asked, Catherine. Marquis Chaos asked me if it was true that Aisha Maria didn't leave the house. What did you do? My sisters greeted when they came home. I quietly shook my head, no, nothing comes to mind. I wasn't acquainted with neither Count Denbar nor Marquis Chaos. From their descriptions in the Noble Almanac, they were both younger than my father and were bureaucrats at the royal palace. I gave the usual answer, she's an eccentric girl who isn't interested in socializing or leaving the house. Yeah, I said that too. You know, isn't it gross that she's become the talk of gossip when she don't even leave the house? My sisters faced each other and shrugged, how terrifying. I also didn't want to be talked about by old men I've never talked to before. Question marks were flying about in my head. I barely met nor knew anyone, yet rumors about me spread throughout high society from that one line in the Noble Almanac. Their imaginations grew bigger because I was a phantom. However, neither I nor my family knew this. 17, New Year holidays. On a calm winter's day with no wind, my sisters were polishing themselves up for the new year. I was also putting a great effort into cleaning the estate, while wearing a maid uniform. It was probably out of the question for nobles to clean with the servants, as I learned in my education it was something that never happened. I've been cleaning the estate since I was a child. I could find out who was giving orders if I went to where the cleaning started, but I didn't want to bring unnecessary troubles to myself. However, no one opposed when I cleaned the places where I always stayed. It was an extension of how I usually clean my room. Still, I couldn't let other people mop my room for me. I felt a sense of fulfillment after I finished cleaning. I think I'm a commoner through and through. Now all that was left was the New Year's decorations. Everyone in my family went to the ball to welcome the new year, at the royal palace on the last day of the year. My sisters were more fired up than ever. The nobles greeted the royal family at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve. The king and queen were there and even their imperial princes. All the imperial princes were handsome. It was only natural that the young ladies of marriageable age were fired up. Anyone could tell that they were good looking, even from their portraits in the noble almanac. I was also supposed to go with my family to greet the royal family, but I couldn't go because of the terrible cold. That happened every year. Most of the servants went off to town to welcome the new year. I heard from the maids that there would be a lot of food carts in town and people would go there in their best clothes. I was a little curious to see that, but I was forbidden from leaving the estate because of my horrible cold. Sounds of fireworks echoed from everywhere at midnight. It was probably really loud outside, since I could hear them from inside the estate. Unfortunately, I couldn't see the fireworks, I could only hear them. When my mother was alive, we would watch the fireworks together while exchanging New Year's greetings, but this year one was by myself in my room. My sister, Catherine, had brewed caramel tea that was kept in reserve for me. Cheers to the new year. I drank a little from the teacup. My family would be out all night at the New Year's ball, so they wouldn't return until dawn. I would greet everyone during the New Year's greetings. I drank my tea and got into bed. I was still awake at dawn, probably because I was nervous about having to get up to greet my family. My room was on the eastmost side of the estate. It was the first room that the sun shone upon. I think a room that the sun shines upon is better, but I wonder how it is for the guests? It's hard for them to sleep in. I opened the faded curtains, brought a chair to the window and waited for the sun to come up. Wow, beautiful. A thin layer of clouds shaped like a vortex in the sky and the sky gradually brightening, it was the perfect first sunrise. Somehow it feels like a good omen. I chose a somewhat appropriate dress to welcome the new year, amongst the leftover dresses I had, and wore it. I was feeling good, so I went to the entrance to greet my family, who stayed out late, with the servants. I glanced at everyone and they were all tired, since they stayed up all night, and it was enough for me to think, if everyone's this tired then we probably don't have to worry about personal conduct. Have a good new year. Oh, Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Yeah, Happy New Year. Yes, Happy New Year. Fuaha, Happy New Year's. The greetings in order, the servants and I, my father, Furur-sama, my brother, older sister Catherine and older sister Rosalie. Everyone greeted each other at the entrance and then the New Year's greetings were over. I'm going to bed. I hope you'll stick with me for this year as well, everyone. My father said it and everyone returned to their rooms. Still, you shouldn't do anything hastily on New Year's Day. I went to the kitchen to make an omelette for breakfast, since there wasn't many people around, and ate slowly in my room. I went for a walk in the garden and I could see my breath in the cold. I calmed my feelings in the stiffening cold and walked gracefully in the garden. I then confirmed that my father had woken up late, ate breakfast and then went to his office. I told the maid to tell him that I would be visiting him. She looked annoyed but passed on the message anyways. I'm glad. I timed my visit with father. I thought that today would be the appropriate time to talk to my father about that. 18. My wish. I was standing nervously in front of the office door. I breathed deeply and calmed myself before knocking on the door. Knock knock. I, who always came to his office whenever he summoned me, sent a message to him in advance to let him know I was coming. Therefore, I wanted to think that my father knew that something was different from usual. Earl Thousand. It's Aisha Marie. I didn't call him father and instead called him Earl Thousand. I accidentally called him that because my fighting spirit showed through. Ah, come in. My father replied as he usually did. I opened the door and entered the office. My father was turned towards the window and only his backside was visible from the doorway. In other words, my father had his back towards me. The wrinkle-free clothes he'd just taken off when he greeted the new year were reflected in my eyes. "It's unusual for you to have business with me. I made sure that Gerlin and the others won't disturb us. You have something to say to me, don't you? Say it." My father turned towards me and said that. He then urged me to sit on the sofa. I glanced up and saw my father's light brown hair and eyes. It was a common color. Being in his 40s, he had some wrinkles around the corner of his eyes. He didn't look like someone that was hard to deal with. As usual, he gave off an aura that would crack under pressure. It was surprising that he'd survived high society this long. It was certainly thanks to the polarizing Fuhrer-sama's support. I controlled my breathing and said, "First of all, Father, do you remember that my birthday is on the 25th day of the month when the flowers bloom? I will be an adult at that time." I wanted to look down, but I can't convey my message to someone if I don't look them in the eyes. I stared at my father's eyes and continued talking. "I have never asked you to celebrate my birthday. I would like you to grant my first and last wish as your daughter. And I want you to grant my wish as Earl 1000. I, who had finished speaking up until that point, felt like the world around me had gone silent. I waited for my father's reply. "It depends on your wish. Tell me what it is." He wasn't haughty, he replied in a calm voice. "I want to be removed from the noble register once I reach adulthood. I found this information from a law book at the library the other day. A child born from a noble and commoner can choose what register they belong to, by applying for it themselves. Therefore, I want to remove myself from the noble register and apply for the commoner one." I didn't avert my eyes from my father's at all. Did my strong determination and earnest thoughts reach him? If I become a commoner, then I'll have nothing to do with the 1000 house. I won't be able to enter this estate. I won't cause trouble for the 1000 house. If I'm gone, then I won't incur Fuhrer-sama's wrath. You won't have to prepare a dowry when I get married. If I teach someone how to help out around the office, then they should easily be able to do my work. So please permit me to enter the commoner's register." I said all at once. My father and I stared at each other. "Aisha Marie, what advantages does this give you?" "I could live as a human being. I know that the necessities I've received till now is better than what commoners get. But, I can't express my emotions around the people here. I want a friend who I can talk equally with. And like my commoner mother, I want to live on my own power. I was treated like a servant, so my true intentions was to live as I liked for once, I'd became a commoner. But that was something that I couldn't say out loud. I was worried about whether I got through to him or not, but I had to tell him in a way that wouldn't break his pride. My father cared too much about the things around him, regardless of whether it was good or bad. But that was also half-hearted. He confined my mother within the estate because he thought that it would be hard for her to raise a child born from a noble in the city. He probably also gauged Fuhrer-sama's feelings on the matter and he eventually noticed that he was hurting the both of them. In addition, as a result of my half-hearted position, I was treated as a heretic by everyone. I had experience living with my mother, a strong-minded commoner, but I guess that the people around me don't understand that I'd been extremely tolerant towards them. If I must say myself, I grew up to be a good child. But I was bad with the social arts of the nobility. If I was the only one taken to this estate, then I'd probably have become a noble with some weird gloomy pride. While I was thinking such things, my father said, "I didn't know we had laws like that. Borrow the book and give it to me. I'll think about it again." It didn't feel like I should stay in the office any longer, so I bowed and left. I was more nervous than I had thought I would be, and as soon as I left the office, I breathed deeply. I had gripped my hands too tightly and nail marks clearly appeared on my palms. Anyway, I'd said what I wanted to say to Father. I left after he said he'd think about it. It was good for my first negotiations against a noble. A lot of places were on holiday until the second day of the new year. The Royal Library would be opened from the 3rd. I headed to the Royal Library again by carriage on my father's orders. I was there to borrow the book that contained noble laws. I was dressed in the clothes that Führer-sama had given me. The Fernand Empire calendar had 7 days and 4 weeks in a month. January was the beginning of the year and March is when the flowers bloom. 19. At the Royal Library. I never thought that I would come to the Royal Library again in a carriage like that. I was more excited when I've arrived at the Royal Library than when I was peeking at the New Year's decorations that still remained on the city streets, through the carriage window. I got off the carriage at the stop and walked alone down the stone pavement. I wasn't just borrowing the book in question, I had also received permission to browse the library. I was so excited when I thought about what books I would find that I quickened my pace. I, who was wearing a milk tea dress, probably didn't stick out like a sore thumb like the last time. I had tried to do my hair up simply in a single ponytail. I didn't have any decorations in my hair, so I might have looked like a maid or tutor if I didn't give my name. The interior of the rustic stone building was even quieter than the last time I visited. A lot of people were probably welcoming the new year in bustling places. It was great for me, who wasn't used to nobles. First, I went to the area exclusive to nobles, that I went to before. I then handed my father's introduction letter to the librarian and headed to the bookshelves that contained the law books. There was no way I would forget where the book in question was. The thick book that looked like it had been used for a long time was waiting for me in the same place. I took the book and turned the pages. There it was. It was that book. I carried the book carefully to the reception area and asked the librarian if I could borrow the book. I was then finished with the most important task. I put the book I borrowed into my purse and roamed the library. I didn't know what books were where, and a lot of paintings were hung on the walls, probably because it was the Royal Library. There were big ones and even small ones. They attracted my interest. I had already gotten bored of seeing the paintings at the estate. That opportunity was precious. I am clearly not taking as much time to appreciate art as much as I should. This painting stimulates my urge to create embroidery designs. All I knew was the name of that trendy painter, but I never had the chance to see their painting. Of course, they didn't make any other paintings. I approached different paintings and looked at them from close and afar. I appreciated the paintings for a while. Lady Aisha Maria. It's been a long time. Do you have any favorite paintings? An unfamiliar voice called out to me from behind, and my body shook on reflex. I turned back slowly and there stood Earl Noir with his black hair and sky blue eyes. He might have been thinking that I was acting suspiciously again. How do you do, Earl Noir? I didn't know that the library had this many paintings on display, so I was just appreciating them. There aren't that many people who focus that much on paintings, so the Imperial Prince, who chose this picture, would probably be happy to hear that. I plastered a smile on my face and honored him. Last time was the first time we had ever met. I was extremely shaken that time, so I was cold towards him, but now that I knew he was father's acquaintance, I had to be decent and courteous towards him. According to the description in the Noble Almanac, Earl Noir is 24 years old. I was sure he inherited his house the previous year. He had no wife or children. He worked as the library's manager. Looking closely, he had a calm and well-featured face. He was an attractive man. I rarely had the chance to speak with noblemen, except for my father and older brother, so I was extremely nervous. No more. Can't he just go somewhere else already? My feelings of wanting him to quickly leave didn't reach him because he said, "I'll show you where the books are placed." What was fun about keeping a young girl like me company? If it's out of duty then I wish he would leave already, I muttered that inside my mind. Eventually, he showed me to where the geography books were. Are you going on a trip or something? I don't have any information on the places that catch my eye in newspapers and documents, so I thought I would like to learn about them. Even though I said it myself, I was being ambiguous. I actually wanted to read those books to examining places I could move to after I became a commoner. My ideal place was a prosperous urban area, somewhere not so touristy, and with a fair number of shops, You're very passionate about studying. Well then, I should return to work. Please take your time browsing. Your clothes today really suit you. I was complimented by an attractive guy. I blushed, but I felt like he forced himself to compliment me. Besides, I was 15 years old, so a 24-year-old was like an uncle to me. I couldn't be happy even if he complimented me. He looks like a nice person, but it was probably just noble flattery. Then I read books until the carriage picked me up. I filled my brain with information about the royal capital's suburbs. Earl Noir was interested that I, unlike normal noble ladies, was interested in paintings and geographic books. Earl Noir was popular because he was attractive and had a calm disposition, and had inherited his house. Therefore, he was fed up with women who were only interested in fashion, beauty and gossip. The only information about me on the streets was that one line in the Noble Almanac. I also didn't show my face in noble society, and rumors of me being an eccentric spread around. However, people had good impressions of me when they actually talked to me, a later story by Earl Noir. Rumors of me being an intelligent woman also spread around the public office. Being interested in paintings and geography might have supported that rumor. Let's tell the Imperial Prince about this. Earl Noir was responsible for delivering books to the royal palace. At those times, he would tell a single Imperial Prince about information going about the city. That kind of information wasn't recorded in the Noble Almanac. I was unaware that information about me was passed on to His Highness, Ludens. 20. Father's conclusion. I'd read the books I wanted to read, and happily left the royal library to return to the estate. I passed the Book of Noble Laws, the complete works of Fernand Empire's Law and Regulations for Nobles, to my father. I stuck a bookmark on the most important page. Of course, I didn't show my father that I was cheerful. I meekly asked my father what he thought. He probably wouldn't have been in a good mood if I had showed him that I was looking forward to being a commoner, since he could take that as I was happy to be a commoner rather than be a noble like him. I didn't want to spoil his mood, since I might lose my hope of becoming a commoner. Certainly, the law you told me about exists. I'll consider your wish and reply to you as soon as possible. My father confirmed that the law existed and told me that he would consider it. Yup, my negotiations have made a bit of progress. At the estate, the servants who had returned to their family homes had yet to return, and it was quieter than usual. My brother and sisters had gone to the city. I returned to my room and compiled the information I had searched about the other cities. I had 2 potential places that I wanted to live in, both had carriages that went there from the royal capital. I tried to write some simple advantages and disadvantages of each place onto a piece of paper. Servants rarely entered my room, but since I had declared that I wanted to live without any connections to the house, I decided that it would be better to not leave clues about where I was going. Although, it would actually be better to hear about the places from someone that had been there. I hid the paper under the bed mattress. Doing laundry in winter was harsh. Although the only thing I hand washed was my underwear, my hands quickly became rough. The cream I got from the city was stinky and not very effective. I soaked my hands in fish mint tea, since I had found that it was good for inflammation and stopped bleeding in a book called Herbs Useful in Life. Fish mint tea wasn't delicious, but in our house it had an effect on beautiful skin. I can't get rid of the redness in my hands. It seems like it'll be more effective to decoct the fish mint. Even if I have a fireplace in my room, the fire is not enough to decoct it. This leaf grows in the shade of the backyard in summer. I'll guess I'll see the effectiveness of this leaf in summer. If it works, then should I mix it into a cream? I'll probably have to wash all my clothes by myself next winter. It seemed like it would be useful to read the books on herbs available in the estate while I could. I muttered to myself while pondering. I would have seemed like an eccentric girl if people saw me. If it's a preserved cream, then I can sell it, can't I? Necessity is the mother of invention. No, don't count your chickens before they hatch. I had handed the book to my father. I, who was feeling like a commoner in spring, wondered about the distant future. I was called to my father's office the day after I gave him the book. I was nervous as I entered the office, but he told me to make clean copies of the documents. He didn't give me a reply. I hid my disappointment, and as I was about to leave the room my father said, "Come back here at 10 o'clock." After that I was so excited, but I still had a lot of clean documents to copy. Afterwards, the numbers on the documents were dancing when I looked at them. I headed to the office again at 10. On my way, older sister Catherine told me to help her prepare for the evening party, but I was able to undertake the task happily. "It's Aisha Maria. May I enter?" "Yes. Enter." I entered the office with my father's permission, and my older brother Gerlin was also there. After a fashion, they asked the maid to make tea and she left. It was decided that we would have tea, the three of us. It was the first time I'd ever had tea in that office. We sat on the sofa. Father was in front of me while older brother Gerlin was next to me on the left. Ah, fragrant tea soothes the heart. I've read the book in question and confirmed the law. And Aisha Maria, I thought about your wishes. I also consulted with Gerlin because it concerns our family. My father said and then drank his tea. "I'll start with my decision. I'll approve of you becoming a commoner. But normally, people don't think about wanting to become commoners. The advantage for the Thousand House is that we don't have to pay your dowry anymore when you get married. Searching for a house for you to marry into is also hard. You soiling the Thousand House name because you lack proper education in certain areas is also problematic. Another advantage is that if Aisha Maria's presence disappears from this house, then Mother's endless anxiety will also disappear. I can only think of you wanting to become a commoner as a disgrace to the Thousand House. You have absolutely no pride, do you? You said yourself that you would have nothing to do with the Thousand House and that you won't cause problems for us. I hope you keep your word." Older brother Gerlin's harsh opinions continued. Whatever was said to me was fine as long as I could become a commoner. I didn't have anything like pride. I just want to become a human being with free will. Thank you. I quietly lowered my head. There were actually a lot of things I wanted to refute. However, I kept my opinions to myself as I've always had. It wasn't like I wanted to restrain myself. I was surprised that I wanted to feel my family's emotions somewhere in that emotionless conversation, though the reality was actually like that. I could only remain calm,